The invitation arrived on a rainy Thursday. It wasn't fancy. Just a cream-colored envelope with my name written across the front in my daughter Emma's neat handwriting. I held it for a long moment before opening it. Family Thanksgiving dinner. Thursday, 6 p.m. Everyone will be there. We can't wait to celebrate together. At the bottom was a small note. Mom, please don't say no this time. The grandchildren really want you there. Love, Emma. I smiled before I realized I was smiling. My name is Eleanor Brooks. I turned 72 that autumn. For 46 years, Thanksgiving had always been at my house. The turkey. The homemade rolls. The pumpkin pies. The laughter. Even after my husband, Thomas, passed away 8 years earlier, I had kept the tradition alive because I believed families needed at least one day each year when everyone sat at the same table. But life changes quietly. Children grow busy. Grandchildren grow older. Phone calls become shorter. Visits become holidays. And sometimes, without anyone saying it aloud, your place at the table begins to disappear. I folded the invitation carefully and placed it beside Thomas's photograph. What do you think? I asked him. His smiling face never answered, but somehow it never had to. He always believed people deserved second chances. Even family. The week before Thanksgiving passed slowly. Every morning I watered the small garden Thomas had planted years before. Most of the flowers had faded with the season, but a few stubborn chrysanthemums still bloomed near the fence. They never quit, Thomas used to say. I touched one of the yellow blossoms and whispered, "Neither do I." Inside the house, I began preparing small gifts for the grandchildren. For 16-year-old Noah, I wrapped the leather-bound journal he'd admired at a bookstore months earlier. For 12-year-old Sophie, I knitted a soft blue scarf. For little Caleb, only 7 years old, I bought the wooden train set he'd pointed at in a shop window. None of the gifts were expensive. My pension didn't allow for expensive. But every ribbon was tied by hand. Every tag was written with care. Love rarely depends on price. The day before Thanksgiving, my phone rang. Emma. Hi, Mom. Hello, sweetheart. You still coming tomorrow? Of course. There was a tiny pause. You don't have to bring anything. I laughed softly. You know I can't arrive empty-handed. Seriously, Mom. I've already baked 2 pumpkin pies. She sighed. I knew you would. Your father would haunt me if I showed up without pie. That made her laugh. For just a moment she sounded like the little girl who used to lick cake batter from the spoon while pretending she wasn't. I'll see you tomorrow. I love you, I said. There was another pause. Then, love you too. The call ended. Something about it felt unfinished. I couldn't explain why. Thanksgiving morning arrived bright and cold. Sunlight spilled through the kitchen windows. The smell of cinnamon, butter, and fresh pastry filled every room. I polished Thomas's old pocket watch before slipping it into my purse. He had carried it every Thanksgiving for nearly 30 years. It's lucky, he'd always insisted. I never believed in lucky objects. But I believed in memories. At 3 o'clock, I put on my burgundy dress. It wasn't new. Neither were my shoes. Still, when I looked in the hallway mirror, I saw a woman who had lived a full life. There were wrinkles. There was grey hair. There were tired eyes. But there was also kindness. Thomas used to tell me kindness never grows old. I hoped he was right. Emma lived only 20 minutes away. I decided to drive myself. The roads were busy with families traveling across town. Children laughed in back seats. Porches displayed pumpkins and wreaths. The entire neighborhood seemed wrapped in warmth. As I pulled into Emma's driveway, I noticed something unusual. There were far more cars than I expected. Almost every parking space along the street was full. I picked up the pies, the gifts, my purse, then walked toward the front door. Before I could knock, I heard music inside. Laughter. Glasses clinking. Someone cheered. I smiled. The house sounded alive. Exactly as Thanksgiving should. I reached for the doorbell. Just before pressing it, I heard a familiar voice through the slightly open dining room window. It was my son-in-law, Daniel. At least this year, he said with a laugh, we won't have to spend 3 hours listening to Eleanor tell the same stories. Several people laughed. Another voice answered. I hid the old dining chair from the garage. More laughter. If she does show up, Daniel joked, she'll have to eat standing. The laughter grew louder. My hand slowly fell away from the doorbell. The warm pie dish suddenly felt much heavier than it had a moment before. Standing alone on the porch, surrounded by the smell of roasted turkey drifting through the window, I realized that sometimes the coldest place on Thanksgiving isn't outside the house. It's knowing the people inside have already decided where you don't belong. For several long seconds, I stood completely still. The laughter inside the house continued as though nothing had happened. Someone turned the music up. Glasses clinked together. A child ran across the living room, laughing so hard that I could hear tiny footsteps thundering across the wooden floor. Life was carrying on only a few feet away. And somehow, I no longer felt part of it. The pumpkin pies grew heavy in my hands. The warmth from the dishes seeped through the oven mitts I had wrapped around them. I stared at the front door. I could still ring the bell. I could walk in with a smile. Pretend I hadn't heard a single word. For years, that had been my way. Smile. Forgive. Stay quiet. Keep the family together. But something inside me felt different that afternoon. Not angry. Just tired. I quietly set one pie on the porch swing beside the gifts and took a slow breath. Then I knocked. The laughter stopped. Footsteps approached. The front door opened. Emma stood there wearing a cream-colored sweater and an apron dusted with flour. Her smile appeared instantly. Mom. She wrapped her arms around me. For a moment, I hugged her back just as tightly. No matter how old our children become, a mother's heart never quite learns how to protect itself from loving them. You made it, she said. I told you I would. She reached for one of the pies. You shouldn't have carried these. I've been carrying pies for almost 50 years. She laughed softly. I suppose you have. As we stepped inside, the warmth of the house surrounded me. The dining room glowed with candlelight. A long wooden table stretched across the room. Turkey rested in the center beside bowls of mashed potatoes, roasted vegetables, cranberry sauce, fresh rolls, and dishes I had taught Emma to cook years ago. For a brief second, I smiled. It looked beautiful. Then I counted the chairs. 1, 2, 3, 10. There were 10 place settings. 10 chairs. 10 folded napkins. 10 name cards. I counted again. Still 10. There were 11 people in the house. My place was missing. Emma noticed where my eyes had gone. Her smile faded. Oh, she whispered so quietly that almost no one could hear. I thought. She looked toward Daniel. I thought he added another chair. Daniel walked into the room carrying a bottle of sparkling cider. Oh. He looked at the table. I guess we forgot. Forgot. Such a small word. Such a painful one. I'll grab something from the garage, Emma said quickly. Daniel shrugged. The folding chairs are uncomfortable anyway. He laughed. No one else did. At that moment, little Caleb came running toward me. Grandma. He threw himself into my arms. I've been waiting for you. I hugged him tightly. And I've been waiting to see you. He noticed the wrapped presents. Are those for us? They certainly are. His eyes sparkled. I knew you'd bring surprises. Children have a way of making the world softer, even when adults make it harder. Across the room, 16-year-old Noah stood quietly beside the fireplace. He smiled politely. It's good to see you, Grandma. You too. Sophie, now nearly a teenager, came over next. She hugged me without saying a word. Something about her expression made me wonder if she had heard the conversation before I arrived. Daniel clapped his hands. All right, everyone. Let's eat before the turkey gets cold. Emma returned carrying an old folding chair. One of its legs wobbled slightly. She placed it at the very end of the table. Away from everyone else. I hope this is okay, she said softly. I smiled. It will do. The meal began. Conversations bounced from football games to vacations, work promotions, school projects, and holiday shopping. Every now and then someone asked me a polite question. How's your garden? Still writing in your journal? Keeping busy? The conversations never lasted more than a minute before moving on. It wasn't unkind. It was simply distant. Halfway through dinner, Daniel raised his glass. I just want to say how thankful I am. Everyone looked toward him. This year has been incredible. He smiled proudly. We're finally putting an offer on the lake house. Cheers filled the room. Emma smiled politely. Noah looked surprised. A lake house. Daniel nodded. If everything goes well. That's amazing, someone said. Daniel laughed. It helps when you stop wasting money on things you don't need. His eyes drifted toward the end of the table. Toward me. The room became strangely quiet. He continued. Sometimes people spend their whole lives hanging on to the past. I think it's healthier to move forward. No one answered. Emma looked down at her plate. I quietly folded my napkin. Thomas used to say that silence often tells the truth faster than words. Little Caleb suddenly spoke up. Grandma isn't stuck in the past. Every adult turned toward him. He looked completely serious. Grandma remembers things because she loves us. No one knew what to say. The 7-year-old had spoken with more honesty than anyone else at the table. I reached over and gently squeezed his hand. Thank you, sweetheart. He smiled. I like your stories. So do I. For the first time that evening, I truly smiled. Because sometimes the smallest voice in the room carries the biggest heart. And without realizing it, Caleb had reminded everyone what Thanksgiving was supposed to be about. Dinner continued, but something had changed. No one said it aloud. No one needed to. Caleb's simple words lingered over the table more heavily than the smell of roasted turkey. Grandma remembers things because she loves us. Daniel cleared his throat and forced a smile. Well, he said, reaching for the gravy boat, who wants dessert? The conversation slowly started again, but it never found the same easy rhythm. Emma glanced at me several times. Each time our eyes met, she looked away. She knew. Maybe not everything. But enough. After dinner, everyone drifted into the living room. The children gathered near the fireplace while the adults carried coffee cups and slices of pie. Noah sat beside me on the sofa. Grandma? Yes. Are you still writing those little stories? I smiled. I write a few every week. I liked the one about Grandpa teaching you to fish. I laughed. Your grandfather caught every fish. So why did he tell everyone you caught the biggest one? Because, I said, smiling at the memory, he thought love was more important than being right. Noah looked thoughtfully into his cup of hot chocolate. I wish I'd known him better. So do I. Across the room, Daniel was showing photos of the lake house on his tablet. It has a private dock, he said proudly. 4 bedrooms. Amazing view. Everyone admired the pictures. I listened quietly. Then one sentence caught my attention. If everything goes through next month, Daniel added, we'll finally have enough after the inheritance paperwork is finished. Inheritance. My heart skipped. Thomas and I had never promised anyone an inheritance. Our savings weren't large. Most of what we had was this little house, carefully paid off over 40 years. I looked toward Emma. She didn't seem surprised. Instead, she looked uncomfortable. Before I could ask anything, Sophie walked over carrying my knitted scarf. You made this? I did. It's beautiful. She wrapped it around her neck and smiled. I'll wear it to school. You'll probably be the warmest person there. She laughed. Then her smile faded. Quietly, so no one else could hear, she whispered. Grandma, can I ask you something? Of course. Are you selling your house? I blinked. What makes you ask that? Dad said you probably wouldn't need it much longer. For a moment, the room seemed to disappear. What exactly did he say? Sophie looked nervous. I wasn't supposed to tell. It's all right. He said, after you move into assisted living, everyone will be happier. The words settled into my chest like cold rain. Assisted living? No one had spoken to me about assisted living. No one had asked what I wanted. I was still living independently. I still drove. I still gardened. I still volunteered twice a week at the library. I wasn't planning to leave my home. Not now. Maybe not ever. I gently squeezed Sophie's hand. Thank you for telling me. She nodded. I didn't think it sounded fair. Before I could say another word, Emma called from the kitchen. Mom, would you help me with the coffee? I followed her. The kitchen was quiet compared to the busy living room. She poured 2 mugs without looking at me. I'm sorry about the chair, she said softly. It wasn't really about the chair. I know. She finally looked up. I'm trying, Mom. Trying to do what? Keep everyone happy. I smiled sadly. That's a very heavy job. She leaned against the counter. Daniel thinks. She stopped. What does Daniel think? He thinks the house is becoming too much for you. My house. She nodded. He says we'd worry less if you lived somewhere with staff. I stirred my coffee slowly. And what do you think? Emma's eyes filled with tears. I think. She hesitated. I don't know anymore. I reached across the counter and took her hand. When you were 8 years old, you climbed the old oak tree in our backyard. She smiled faintly. You remember that? You refused to come down. You climbed up after me. And do you remember what I told you? Emma nodded. You said, never let someone else decide how high you can climb. I smiled. I've never forgotten. She wiped a tear from her cheek. I'm sorry. For what? For not standing up for you more. Before I could answer, Daniel walked into the kitchen. There you two are. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. We're talking about Christmas. Emma quickly stepped away. Daniel looked at me. So, have you given any more thought to downsizing? There it was. The question hidden behind weeks of polite conversations. I answered calmly. No. He laughed lightly. Well, eventually everyone has to make practical decisions. I already have. Oh. I'm staying in my home. His smile tightened. It's a big place for one person. It became a home because 2 people filled it with love. Silence. Then Daniel shrugged. We'll talk again. No, I said gently. We won't. He looked surprised. My home isn't a family discussion. It's my decision. For the first time that evening, Daniel had nothing to say. Just then, the front doorbell rang. Everyone looked toward the hallway. I'll get it, Noah called. A few moments later, he returned with a small cardboard box. Grandma, he said. I think this was delivered for you by mistake. I looked at the label. It had my name. The return address belonged to the community library where I volunteered. I opened it carefully. Inside was a framed photograph. It showed dozens of children gathered around me during summer reading week. On the back was a handwritten note. Dear Mrs. Brooks, thank you for teaching our children that books can become lifelong friends. Your kindness has changed more lives than you'll ever know. Happy Thanksgiving. With gratitude, the library volunteers. I held the frame against my chest. No expensive gift. No grand speech. Just genuine appreciation. Sometimes strangers see our worth more clearly than the people closest to us. As I looked around the room, I noticed something unexpected. Noah was smiling. Sophie was smiling. Caleb was holding my hand. And Emma. Emma was quietly crying. Perhaps, I thought, not every heart in this family had forgotten what gratitude looked like. And perhaps, this Thanksgiving wasn't the ending of something after all. Maybe it was the beginning of the truth finally finding its place at the table. The house slowly grew quieter as the evening wore on. One by one, relatives gathered their coats, hugged one another, and stepped out into the cold November night. The laughter that had filled every room only an hour earlier faded into the sound of car doors closing and engines starting. Soon, only 5 of us remained. Emma, Daniel, the children, and me. Caleb was the first to yawn. Emma smiled at him. I think someone's had a long day. I don't want Grandma to leave yet, he mumbled. I'll visit again soon, I promised. He wrapped his small arms around my waist before running upstairs with Sophie. Noah lingered behind. He looked at me for a moment, then reached into his pocket. I made this in school. He handed me a folded piece of paper. When I opened it, I found a pencil sketch. It was my garden. The old wooden bench. The rose bushes. And Thomas standing beside me with one hand resting gently on my shoulder. You remembered Grandpa from the photographs, I said softly. I wanted him to be with you. My eyes filled with tears. It's beautiful. He smiled shyly. Happy Thanksgiving, Grandma. Then he followed his brother and sister upstairs. I held the drawing for a long time. Sometimes children give gifts that no amount of money can buy. Daniel returned to the dining room carrying empty plates. Emma, he said, can you help me clean up? She nodded. I'll be there in a minute. Instead, she sat beside me. Neither of us spoke immediately. She looked around the living room. The old family photographs. The handmade quilt folded over the sofa. The framed picture of Thomas in his army uniform. You know, she said quietly, every Thanksgiving when I was little, I thought our house was the happiest place in the world. It was. I didn't realize how much work you and Dad put into it. I smiled. That's because parents try to make hard work look easy. She lowered her eyes. I think somewhere along the way, I stopped noticing. I gently placed my hand over hers. We all stop noticing things sometimes. I should have called more. You still can. I should have visited more. You still can. She looked at me with tears in her eyes. Do you think you'll ever forgive me? I squeezed her hand. My dear. A mother's heart doesn't keep score. It only hopes. She rested her head against my shoulder just as she had done when she was a little girl frightened by thunderstorms. For a few precious moments, neither of us needed words. The peace didn't last. Daniel walked into the room. His expression was tight. We need to talk. Emma sat up. About what? The house. She sighed. Daniel. No. He looked directly at me. This can't wait. I remained calm. Go ahead. He folded his arms. I think we're all avoiding the obvious. The obvious? You're getting older. Yes. The house is too much. I disagree. It needs repairs. I've managed them. You'll need help eventually. So will everyone. He took a slow breath. I already spoke to a realtor. Emma's face turned pale. You what? I was just gathering information. You didn't tell me that. I was going to. He looked back at me. You could sell while the market is high. You'd have money. You'd have care. You wouldn't be alone. I listened without interrupting. When he finally finished, I stood. For 72 years I had learned that calm voices often carried farther than angry ones. Daniel, I said gently. May I tell you something? He nodded. This house isn't just wood. It isn't bricks. It isn't an investment. It's where Emma took her first steps. It's where Noah learned to ride his bicycle. It's where Sophie baked her first cookies. It's where Caleb planted sunflower seeds with me last spring. And it's where Thomas spent the last morning of his life drinking coffee before walking into the garden. The room became perfectly still. I don't live in that house because I'm afraid of change. I live there because it reminds me every single day that love leaves footprints. Daniel looked away. For the first time since I'd known him, he seemed unsure of himself. Emma finally spoke. The house isn't for sale. He turned toward her. But it isn't. She stood beside me. And no one discusses my mother's future without my mother's permission. Daniel stared at her in surprise. She had always been gentle. Tonight, she was steady. I should have said this months ago, she continued. I'm saying it now. My mother has spent her whole life protecting this family. It's time we protect her. Silence filled the room. Then Daniel slowly lowered his head. I thought I was doing the practical thing. Maybe, Emma answered. But practical isn't always kind. An hour later, I gathered my coat. The children hurried downstairs one last time to say goodbye. Sophie wrapped the blue scarf around her neck. I'm wearing this tomorrow. It suits you. Caleb hugged me so tightly I almost laughed. When are you coming back? Very soon. Noah walked me to my car. Before I climbed inside, he looked at me seriously. Grandma? Yes. Next year. He smiled. Can Thanksgiving be at your house again? I looked at the porch light shining warmly through my windshield. If everyone wants to come, my door will always be open. He grinned. I'll bring dessert. I laughed. You'd better. The drive home felt peaceful. The streets were quiet now. Most families had already finished their meals. As I turned onto my street, I saw the familiar porch light glowing in front of my little house. Just as Thomas used to leave it for me whenever I came home after evening classes. Everyone deserves to come home to a light, he would say. I unlocked the front door. The house greeted me with its familiar stillness. Not empty. Never empty. Because every room held a memory. I placed Noah's drawing on the mantel beside Thomas's photograph. Then I looked at my husband's smiling face. You were right. About what? I imagined him asking. Kindness. It really doesn't grow old. Outside, the wind carried the last leaves of autumn across the yard. Inside, I made myself a cup of tea and sat by the window. For the first time in a long while, I didn't think about the empty chair at Emma's table. I thought about the chairs waiting in my own dining room. Next Thanksgiving, they would all be there again. Not because anyone was obligated to come, but because home isn't the place with the biggest table. It's the place where every chair is waiting for someone who is loved. And that night, as the porch light glowed softly against the darkness, I realized something Thomas had known all along. A family can lose its way. But as long as one person keeps the light on, someone will always find their way home. Winter arrived quietly. The maple tree outside my kitchen window stood bare, its branches stretching toward a gray sky that seemed to grow darker a little earlier each afternoon. Life settled back into its familiar rhythm. On Mondays, I volunteered at the community library. On Wednesdays, I met 2 old friends for coffee. On Saturdays, I visited Thomas's grave with fresh flowers from my garden whenever the weather allowed. Some days were lonely. But loneliness is different from regret. I no longer regretted speaking the truth. The first snowfall came in early December. I was hanging tiny white lights across my front porch when a car slowly pulled into the driveway. Emma stepped out first. Then Noah. Sophie. Caleb. Finally, Daniel. No one spoke right away. I walked to the front door and smiled. You don't have to stand in the cold, I said. Come inside. The familiar scent of cinnamon greeted us as we entered. Caleb immediately ran toward the living room. My favorite chair is still here, he shouted. It was waiting for you, I answered. Sophie wandered through the hallway, stopping to admire old family photographs. I forgot how many pictures Grandpa took. He believed every ordinary day was worth remembering. Noah picked up one framed photograph of Emma as a little girl wearing oversized rain boots. He laughed. Mom, was that really you? Emma covered her face. I hoped that picture had disappeared years ago. It never disappeared, I said. It just waited for someone to smile at it again. For the first time in months, genuine laughter filled my home. Daniel remained near the doorway. His hands stayed inside his coat pockets. He looked uncomfortable. Finally, he spoke. Mrs. Brooks. I looked at him. I owe you an apology. The room grew quiet. I convinced myself I was helping. He looked around the house. I kept talking about property values, maintenance, and practical decisions. He shook his head slowly. I forgot this place wasn't just a house. It was your life. He took a slow breath. And I made you feel like it was something to be gotten rid of. I could hear how difficult the words were for him. Real apologies usually are. I'm sorry. No excuses. No blaming anyone else. Just those 2 simple words. I smiled gently. Thank you. Emma looked relieved. So? Daniel asked quietly. Can we start over? I walked into the kitchen. Everyone watched curiously. A moment later, I returned carrying Thomas's old cookie tin. The blue paint had chipped around the edges after decades of use. I opened it. Inside were ginger cookies, Thomas's favorite recipe. I only share these, I said with a smile, with people who are welcome in my home. Daniel smiled for the first time that afternoon. I'll consider that a yes. You should. As Christmas drew closer, something unexpected happened. The family started visiting more often. Not because of holidays. Not because they needed something. Just because they wanted to. Sometimes Noah came after school to finish homework at my kitchen table. Sophie asked me to teach her how to knit. Caleb insisted every Saturday was Grandma Pancake Day. The house slowly found its laughter again. Even Emma began stopping by after work with nothing more than 2 cups of coffee and an hour to talk. One evening she looked around the living room and quietly asked, "Mom, were you ever angry with me?" I thought carefully before answering. I was hurt. But anger doesn't build bridges. What does? Listening. She nodded. I wish I'd listened sooner. So do I. Then we both laughed. Because wishing couldn't change yesterday. But it could change tomorrow. Christmas Eve arrived wrapped in fresh snow. For the first time in years, my dining table was full again. Not because it was the biggest table. Because everyone chose to be there. Daniel carved the turkey. Emma set the table. Noah helped Caleb hang ornaments that somehow always ended up crooked. Sophie stood beside me in the kitchen, carefully rolling pie crust. "You always pinch the edges exactly the same way," she observed. "My grandmother taught me. And now you're teaching me." I smiled. That's how traditions survive. During dinner, Caleb climbed onto his chair and tapped his spoon against his glass. "I have something to say." Everyone stopped talking. "I think." He looked around the room. "Grandma's house feels different." Daniel smiled. "Different how?" Caleb thought for a moment. "It feels." He searched for the right word. "Safe." No one spoke. Children often discover truths adults overlook. Emma reached across the table and took my hand. So did Dad. My eyes filled with tears. Thomas had always said our home should be the safest place in the world. Hearing those words again felt like hearing his voice across the years. After dinner, we gathered in the living room. Snow fell gently outside. The fireplace crackled softly. Daniel carried in one final gift. It wasn't wrapped. It was an old wooden chair. Freshly sanded. Carefully repaired. The scratches were still there. So were the tiny dents in the arms. But it looked strong again. "I found it in the garage," he said quietly. "The one we forgot at Thanksgiving." He placed it beside the dining table. I thought. He smiled awkwardly. It deserved another chance. I walked over and rested my hand on the back of the chair. "It's beautiful. It isn't perfect. Neither are families." The room grew quiet. Then Emma placed one hand on the chair. Noah added his. Sophie. Caleb. Finally Daniel. I rested my hand beside theirs. No one said another word. None were needed. Because sometimes healing doesn't arrive with grand speeches. Sometimes it begins with one repaired chair, one honest apology, and one family choosing, at last, to leave no seat empty. When I turned off the lights that night, I looked once more at the dining room. Every chair stood neatly pushed beneath the table. None were forgotten. None were hidden. And somehow, I knew that no matter what the years ahead might bring, this home would never again be measured by its walls. It would be measured by the people who chose, again and again, to gather around its table.